Our main message this year is that inequality is out of control. We have broken economies that are rewarding those at the top, the billionaires with wealth, and not rewarding the hard work of ordinary people around the world. Last year alone, 82% of all the total new wealth created was captured by the 1%, and the 50% ordinary workers went away with nothing, 3.7 billion people. The billionaire wealth is increasing 6 times faster than the wages of ordinary workers. So what we see is that we have economies that continuously, business elites and political elites have decided that the benefits of growth be captured and taken by a few at the top at the cost of the wages of ordinary people, their living conditions, their public services. Companies prefer to pay shareholders big dividends and CEOs big bonuses than to give workers a living wage, than to treat women equally with men in the workplace.
So the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, but what about the stats saying that overall many more people have been lifted out of poverty? That's often cited.
Two things there. First, there is an obsession with GDP by our government leaders, politicians. They want to look at a figure of growth, but not look at who is benefiting from that growth. So, yes, there's celebration around here that the economy has recovered, but recovered for who? Recovered for those at the top who took 8 cents out of every dollar last year. Then the second thing is that there's a fictitious poverty line set by the World Bank that those who earn less than $1.90 a day are the ones living in poverty, and everybody above is okay. But let me tell you something. Oxfam works with garment workers in Vietnam, in Myanmar, in Bangladesh. Some of them earn $4 a day, but they live in debt. They work 6 days a week, sometimes up to 20 hours a day, trying to make overtime. When they are ill, they are not paid. When they are pregnant, they are fired. They have no right of freedom of speech in the workplace. They can't unionize. These are the conditions. In America, we've spoken with poultry workers. A woman like Dolores and her colleagues in the packing chickens for the supermarkets have to work in diapers because they are not allowed toilet breaks. Those are the conditions of workers. It's on the backs of people living in those conditions that some at the top, billionaires, are getting more and more wealth. We were creating 2 billionaires every 2 days in the last year. That's the result of paying more and more to shareholders and depressing wages and the living conditions of those who work. And that must stop. We are here to call for action.
Well, here the biggest, perhaps, billionaire attracting attention is US President Donald Trump. He's announced tax cuts and he keeps on talking about not the elites. He is distancing himself, although he's here, from this elite, talking about the missing middle. But it seems like you don't buy that.
You know, President Trump keeps talking about his America First policy. But in my view, it is a billionaire's first policy. He was elected by Americans to fix a rigged political and economic system. What we have seen is that he's come in to reward those at the top at the expense of those at the bottom. The first thing he has done, the first piece of legislation, is a tax gift to the super rich, so that those who have inheritance don't have to be taxed a lot, and so that big corporations can pay a smaller tax rate, a lower tax rate. This is at the cost of ordinary people. What will result, obviously, will be that the services for those who live in poverty will be cut as a result of that reduction. We are also seeing him do more to harm the world and the people who live in poverty around the world, like when he cut sexual and reproductive health budgets. That was money that was saving the lives of millions of women, poor women around the world, by providing them reproductive health services. He cut that. He walked out of the climate change negotiation, of the climate agreement that was meant to protect our planet from roasting, and the worst victims of climate change, as we know, are poor women and poor men. So President Trump is not unique. He's typical of so many other political leaders who have chosen to serve the interests of the few at the expense of ordinary, hard-working people. This must change.
The French president has warned of a race to the bottom when it comes to tax cuts, because tax, like you say, provides social services for the poor. But what about the argument that companies will rush in, companies will do well in America, they'll export, they'll create jobs?
Indeed, President Trump has joined the race to the bottom. But that is a serious problem for ordinary people, because tax dodging has reached such an extent that for many countries, developing countries, they don't have enough resources to put into the education, the health, the infrastructure that will lift people from poverty. This race to the bottom hasn't just started yesterday. It's been going on. Europe itself, some of the European countries are themselves tax havens because they've created policies in order to attract untaxed money from the developing countries. Developing countries are estimated to lose about $100 billion of tax money, untaxed money, by companies that channel their profits to tax havens. This has been going on. Panama Papers showed this. Paradise Papers showed that governments are sitting comfortably and allowing this leaking tax system to continue rewarding those at the top. And it must stop. And we know what needs to be done.
Finally, what is your message to South Africa, that has one of the most unequal societies in the world and has to navigate this world now when the biggest economy is turning inward, it seems?
South Africa is a country that's one of the most unequal in the world. I think it comes almost like number 2 after Swaziland. But South Africa has inherited this from its system of apartheid. We've seen South Africa take many courageous steps to reduce inequality, like taxing the rich and plowing money into public services. South Africa should continue in that direction of taxing the rich and not placing the tax burden on the poor, closing the gaps on tax dodging, those companies that have used the loopholes. South Africa should close those loopholes and collect that money and continue to plow in money to public services, and also establishing a living wage that workers don't earn but remain trapped in poverty. South Africa is doing quite a lot to try to fight inequality, but is coming from a place of gross inequalities because of the history of apartheid.